A lot of people are saying this time is really the most scary time for humanity. In many ways, what people are experiencing now is a war on consciousness, a spiritual battle, if you will. The time of splits, the shift of the 3D versus the 5D. So think of it as we're dealing with the existential crisis of more AI, more of a disconnect, this kind of narcissistic edge society's experiencing that I spoke on. Then we need to have the opposite end of the spectrum increasing just as much as the other end of the spectrum, which is leading to the shadow in the collective consciousness. So with more separation, we also have to deal with more acceptance and integration on the other side. And so I think that this new earth reality, what that's going to be breeding is almost a utopian new value system, which is given birth to through new children, through new vehicles of awareness. And the souls that are awakening are going to be so integrated, so loving, so supportive of a higher intelligence and more connection and love on planet Earth, that it's going to be balancing out the spectrum, maybe leading to an experience in the future in which there's almost like two Earths at the same time.
Gabi Kovalenko, welcome on the show. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
I think I'd have to say the thing that makes me most excited is the launch of my TV show that I filmed in Ecuador a few months ago. It was a very new and interesting experience for me. It was my first time channeling, doing a live transmission the way that I usually do, except with a whole camera crew around me, following me around in nature, with no script, with no teleprompter. They couldn't even believe themselves that I would be just dropping these wisdom bombs on the spot, because most people think that I need to prepare ahead of time. And this was essentially a whole course on consciousness expansion, on inner healing, just really streamed in the mode from source. And so that's dropping this Sunday. Actually, by the time this podcast releases, it's already going to be live on INTI.TV. So I'm very excited for people to see what I recorded, and it's actually something I myself haven't yet previewed. So I have no idea what exactly I said because it was coming out completely live and from the heart in the moment. And I'm just really excited to share this consciousness transmission and to allow people to feel into the live nature of really how this awareness comes through.
Yeah.
So that's coming soon.
When I started going on my own spiritual awakening in the beginning of my 20s, I started to activate this deep remembering that I think you were talking about when you say that you talk and you don't remember what you said, but you are coming at it from, this inherent wisdom that is you by recognizing who you are in truth. And we might hear around this word of unearned wisdom. And from older generations might not understand these concepts of how someone so young can tap into this potential of possibilities and wisdom and knowledge. So I read once that you said that you began to grasp that wisdom is not acquired, but remembered. And with that, you challenged yourself to dare to express what previously you had not allowed yourself to. So I'd love to walk people through this journey of what it is to tap into wisdom from your heart, the inherent knowing, instead of just grasping on concepts and ideas in the outer world and regurgitating information.
It's a beautiful point. I view wisdom as the truth of primordial consciousness. It's the essence of spirit. It's what already lives in the field. And so when we put ourselves into a particular frequency, which is the frequency of love or of truth, we're able to open up our own divine channel and connect to this inner knowing. Every person innately has this inherent knowing. There's a knowing of who you are at your core when it comes to the innate qualities of self. It's who you were before all the conditioning biases set in, before the program nature was developed, before you started to lean into your mental intellect to make all the decisions and choices in your everyday life. It's simply the knowing that comes through when you're deeply in touch with your energy. And that's that truth that's developed simply through more deep integration of who you are in the most authentic sense. So what I encourage people to do is to essentially think about who were they before they were conditioned to be their physical identity. And the physical identity is usually so hard to detach from because it's everything that we think about ourselves. It's the person that we've chosen to conjure up as the persona. It's our chosen job. It's our chosen possessions, everything that we choose to attach to gain a certain sense of self. But that sense of self is typically very false in nature. It's untrue because it's the person we think we need to be to achieve a set outcome in life. It's part of the process of trying to model a version of yourself that is comfortable in the world, that is achieving success, abundance, comfort, fitting in. And that very nature of fitting in is what I think makes us detach from the real soulful alignment with the wisdom of the higher self. So wisdom is something that's really multidimensional in nature. It involves disassociating from the rigid mind to be able to contact the energy, which inspires us to flow in the direction of consciousness and the truth that is pervasive in all things. So in my case, I definitely realized that there's a lot deeply within me that wants to be channeled, wants to be expressed initially through just writing, which I realized I can get into this flow state when I choose to just not be driven by the mental commands, when I'm not thinking about what I was taught in school or what people are expecting from me, or what other people are talking about. I tap into a much deeper place of knowing. And that feels like a very deep frequency of love. It's a place where I feel divinely inspired to be creative. It's a very feminine state that I've contacted in my own field, which then allows that wisdom to expand. And the beautiful thing is I think wisdom connects us to divine purpose. It's really the mission that we can contact, which is found in truly trusting what our energy wants to do, what direction does it want to flow in. And so all of us have this deep touch point of wisdom in our own hearts and souls, which lets us realize, what are we really meant to be doing here? In that multidimensional way, we can think about, if we came down into this lower dimensional plane and we need to remember who we are, we need to contact that point of being really a purposeful being. We have to remember, what did our energy initially want to do when it chose to incarnate in this time-space matrix? Why are we choosing to be here to express ourselves authentically, creatively, as kind of across the palette of consciousness? What are all these radiant qualities that we can start to exude when we allow ourselves simply to be? And that's where wisdom really starts to flow in the form of downloads, creative ideas, different things that you feel passionate about expressing. And in my case, that just became something that I more deeply and deeply started to contact and then express more and more, in which case it started to just flow out to the point where now I can, sit in the middle of Ecuador and just record an entire series on this, because these are concepts that are very ethereal in nature. These are archetypal themes that we can all really contact if we're choosing to lean into our hearts and feel into what is the purpose of our experience, which of course comes through the realm of feeling and being in touch with everything somatically, experientially, not just from a cognitive place of thinking about all these things. So that's the main thing I'd say. It's contacting wisdom is about not trying to think about these different concepts, but it's about remembering what your soul already knows. It's about who you were before the identity shaped up, which is really remembering who you were even as a spirit before you chose to be a human in this incarnation.
Remembering that we are that spirit. And there's a teacher that we both share interest in, Dolores Cannon, and she talks about that humanity is going to be going through a split, essentially where there's going to be different realities simultaneously at the same time on the same planet, and we're going to essentially break up into a higher dimensional realm, what a lot of people are now calling maybe the new Earth, and then the matrix that has been storing human consciousness and capacity for so many years and decades and centuries. Where do you see us in this moment of the split? Where are we headed? And sort of what are these two differences of this side versus this side that we're going to create a juncture point?
Mm-hmm. So typically people refer to this split as the difference between the 3D and the 5D. That's the most basic way to characterize the split in consciousness, because 3D is associated with the rigidity of the ego, this kind of masculine shadow. It's the box through which we can perceive reality as just a fixed construct in which there is no ability to flow into the heart's consciousness, where we remain detached from spirit. We're making choices based on purely conditioned reflexes and responses that are societally programmed. And so this 3D construct is something that keeps us very limited. We don't experience ourselves as a spirit. There is no fluid identity. There's no energy that's compelling us to really be and explore our purpose or true intentions. It's simply a model in which we act in a very conditional manner. So not only are we conditioned to be this version of ourselves, but everything is conditional in this 3D world. That's kind of the old paradigm. It's the world in which we regurgitate responses, just like you said. It's the reality in which we create an avatar early in our lives, and then we just do everything based on that conditioning model. So we end up being sucked into a certain job, or we have certain relationships, which make us feel like we just need to be experiencing whatever we were initially conditioned to experience. In that reality, there is no true purpose. There is no constant expansion. There's no familiarity with our heart's awareness. It's simply a way of being that is kind of robotic or monotone in nature. And so that conditioning model doesn't allow us to explore really the point of this experience. It is unconscious in nature. It's driven by a lot of primal responses, a lot of fear, the survival mode, living from the lower chakra system, which is simply about physical output, making money, experiencing things on the physical, more primitive level, which is really the unexplored aspect of human potential. Or should I say, that's what we're used to, and it's not allowing us to tap into the unexplored qualities of the higher self. So meanwhile, the 5D is really the bridge into the world of spirit. It's where we can start to contact our own multidimensional nature and really recall, what is the point of choosing to be here? Usually when we get into this 5D sort of consciousness, we remain open to our identity. We look at ourselves as a fluid essence. We recognize that we are not just this physical self. We really are a multidimensional self. We are energy, which means we have the capacity to be this fluid entity. We can have a broad personality. We can be choosing to explore our creativity in synergy with our mental intellect and create a career and a life path, which is really at the nexus of spirituality and the physical world. Now, 5D consciousness is not about disassociation. So I think a lot of people in the spiritual world are trying to disassociate from the 3D. That can be a real issue, because if we're trying to move away from the 3D, like reject our physical essence and our identity and our attachment to the earth plane, that's still going to lead to suffering and to disillusionment, because that doesn't integrate the fact that we as a soul chose to come down here to really master the art of integration, which is the way that I would really define spirituality. Spirituality is about bringing together these different aspects of self. It's about enjoying your role as a human avatar. It's about figuring out how can you master harmony, balance, find the divinity in the physical journey, and find the way to be both heart-centered and mental at the same time, to constantly expand, to keep enjoying your physical capabilities, which allows you to both love yourself and love reality. But the 5D is also not about just being ingrained in what's on the other side. It's about finding the way to be spiritually fulfilled in the now moment, which means being very present and opening yourself up to a whole canvas of new experiences. So in the 5D sense, it's when people really start to open their hearts and think about the feeling that they want to experience in reality. It's about contacting frequencies on a whole new level. It's feeling not like reality is a simulation that dishes out to you certain possibilities that you respond to, but rather you start to see yourself as the architect of this game. You start to imagine that if you are both source and, the source of your life and the source of creation kind of entangled as an aspect of consciousness, it allows you to see how you're playing into this creation in real time, how everything in your life is an extension of you and an expression of source consciousness at the same time. So it allows you to feel a degree of limitlessness and freedom to both paint new possibilities in real time and also to ascertain a deeper sense of personal mastery. Because if you start to see everything as a reflection of you, there is no more fear. There's no more survival mechanism that needs to rule your reality. You're touching a point of really being unbound by these past conditioning biases, by everything that might make you initially feel like you are, an output of the physical world, that your trauma is something that defines you, or that you're simply responding to the possibilities that exist. In this 5D model, you're experiencing yourself as constantly in harmony with everything all around you. And if you want something to change, you start to realize you are the creator of that change. And so that provides a really new edge to reality, where you start to feel like if you're the engineer of this experience, anything that you want to see change, you need to be the precursor to. You need to think about how can you change something energetically within yourself to literally step into a new dimension within reality. And that's where ultimately the 5D is a space in which all possibilities are possible. You are constantly flowing with reality, and you're not perceiving deterministically the causes and the effects, but you see yourself as kind of on both ends of the spectrum at the same time. And so I find that to be a very liberating perspective. This is the kind of zone in which people can heal and experience quantum jumping and different phenomena which are purely energetic in nature and can be even explained by quantum physics, which is also the less reductionistic way of viewing reality as a quantum realm of limitless possibilities. So the 5D is a beautiful place to experience yourself. And right now we're already experiencing this. So to your question, people are already experiencing either the old paradigm or the new paradigm in one time-space matrix based on our own frequency and energetic configuration. We're experiencing one or the other. This is why so many people right now are starting to wake up, because we have the opportunity and we can see through different conscious communities, through meeting people that are really perceiving the world through a loving lens, that it's really based on choice. We have the free will to decide if we want to be living in the old world or in the new world. And the split is becoming more and more apparent, wherein some people are just bound to experience more and more suffering, and they think that that is inevitable because that's what they have been conditioned to believe. And they're not daring enough to realize that there is another way to perceive themselves. Meanwhile, the people that are choosing to integrate, they're choosing to really approach the light aspect of consciousness with hope, with a desire to be more deeply integrated, to serve the divine, to find their purpose, to experience love and unity consciousness. Those are the people that start to experience that reality. And so that's essentially the choice that we have. As an energetic being, we can choose to wake up, we can choose to align with these higher frequencies, to come into this higher chakra activation, which is really moving into our higher self, which is even above the standard 7 chakra system. That's more about the 12th chakra. It's actually outside of your physical body. It's a reality in which you're physically living in a higher dimensional state because you're constantly contacting the truth of your spirit and communicating this truth through every action, decision, thought, and intention. And so if you choose to drop into that deeper state of embodying your purpose, you're experiencing Earth as a landscape of higher dimensional possibility, which is the 5D. So that's the choice that we can make, and it's all up to our perspective.
Yeah, and beautifully said. I wanted to ask you, you said this integration of brain and heart, that those two in coherence of merging the feminine with the masculine. What do you think are the, outcomes when someone is very developed in their heart space but has not mastered their mind, and vice versa, very, very intellectual, very in their mind, knows how to manifest things with their mind in the material world, but has not developed the compassion or the heart to sustain that? So how do you see these two? You talked about the balance, but what happens when people go to an extreme? They develop too much in this space and not enough in the mind, and the other way around as well.
I think a really good way to characterize that is the difference between the toxic masculine expression and the toxic feminine expression, because these are the two extreme ends of the polarity spectrum. If the goal is to be experiencing synergy and divine balance, which is really the harmony and divine dance between the masculine and feminine, that's like the yin yang. That's when we can see perfect harmony, balance, and the two becoming one. But in some cases, if we're just heart-centered, but in a way that we give all of our authority to the feeling state, that can end up giving all the energy to this yin energy, essentially the dark feminine expression. And the dark feminine has a way of being really intense, very open and wild, and sometimes even fierce in its expression of emotion. That can be a very ungrounded way to perceive reality, because if it's just emotive, if it's just based on the pure responding aspect, then that is not really in touch with what can we give to this experience to experience balance. If we're just receiving input from the environment and we're responding to it, we end up feeling like a victim. And so the people that have this wounded feminine nature, we can see are typically expressing a lot of violent emotions. They may be dealing with a lot of trauma responses, like people that have gone through, let's say, intense abuse, and they feel like a victim. What can typically happen characteristically is these people feel a lot of deep pain, and the wounded nature doesn't allow them to embody their purpose. They're unable to see that they can transmute negative experiences to feel a state of empowered action. Because they're not in that masculine state of orienting themselves physically and somatically with what they can do to transmute this unexpressed potential, what they're experiencing is just more pain, more suffering, a lot of grief, a lot of emotions, which lead to internal energetic contraction. And so if you feel that kind of contracted state in which you're feeling everything in your heart chakra, you might be a wounded empath. You might be feeling like this world is just a place in which you experience more and more suffering. But in reality, that suffering is due to you not being in a healthy state of balance in which you can express your potentiality. And so what often comes through in the truth of the heart chakra when there's a lot of pain there is that we need to take that pain and turn it into purpose. We need to understand how the pain we're feeling is allowing us to route the desire to transmute the pain into something that we can actually change in ourselves and in the world. We're very often the wounded empath, the people that are such deep feelers, especially a lot of women that are physically so in touch with their feminine that it can lead to emotional overwhelm, is that those emotions need to be used to create a sense of a real desire to do something about the imbalance that they're feeling in the world. The empath turns into a superhuman when they're able to take this divine wisdom coming through emotional connection and to allow it to become action, and to take this deep feeling of a desire to change something and to allow it to become the source of that change. Meanwhile, feeling disempowered will just lead to more and more of this emotional overwhelm. So the other end of the spectrum, if emotions are not integrated whatsoever, the exact opposite happens. So the toxic masculine is a mode in which we act purely from the lower chakra sense of wanting to do things for a set reason. So it's purely mental. It's purely something that we see played out in a lot of narcissistic stories, wherein people just do things because they want something out of a certain situation. They want to maybe present themselves in a certain way, achieve conditional success, prove their identity, achieve money, achieve success, fame, a certain relationship. It's also very deterministic. We do everything because our ego wants us to achieve a certain thing. And so without the heart-centered focus, what ends up happening is even though we can get what we want, we can be really effective manifestors from that mental place, we end up feeling empty. There is no fulfillment because if the heart is not connected, then we end up manifesting just to hide the inner void. And there's still this inherent emptiness, which makes us feel sad even after we get what we physically want. And I think that's really the overwhelming theme in the world today. Most people are functioning in this overly masculine perspective and kind of energetic alignment because we're taught to be more masculine in nature. Both men and women tend to have a very hard approach in life because that's what the school system typically reinforces. That's what parents typically teach. It's more of an approach of, don't be too in touch with your emotional state. That is weakness, where vulnerability is connected to a state of disempowerment, because what's taught is really the refined egoic strategy. And very often people don't even realize how to synergize thinking with feeling because they don't realize that these two things can be orchestrated in tandem with each other. That's a really, really big issue. One of the saddest things that I often see are when children are taught to suppress their emotions because their parents say, to a little boy, you can't cry. Or to a little girl, you're too weak if you show your emotions. Or if they're experiencing any kind of pain or sadness, just suppress those things because you need to do things in a certain way. This is very commonly the narrative that parents will implement in a child's psyche when they want them to have a certain career or they want to do something specifically to maybe, see their child fulfill a dream that they themselves have not experienced. So where this change really needs to begin is in conscious parenting. That's what I'm a huge advocate for because I think most of this trauma that ends up leading to the distortion in people's identity and really the crisis that we see in people being over masculine and not being feeling in nature as well is because the child is not given the permission to really hold space for their own emotional state and to see the deep wisdom in emotion. And so that's where it all begins. If we can't experience our wisdom as an adult, then there was some moment in our early lifetime experience when we chose to just disassociate from the wisdom altogether. That's a very sad reality because if we're now feeling a split, for example, the outer world is not conforming to what we want to be experiencing. Maybe we're not happy in our relationship, in work. We want something else. Maybe we feel a certain calling, but it's a subtle whisper coming through our intuition where we receive some kind of idea that's something that our ego doesn't really want to conform to. We might just blow off that idea. We might think that that's coming from somewhere outside of us. That's just random or even a distraction. When in reality, those moments in which we contact the truth of our spirit, maybe through a sense of feeling discomfort relative to what we have manifested from the egoic state, is guiding us to make the changes necessary to be really experiencing alignment in our lifetime. And if we're not used to embodying our truth and seeing the wisdom in our own feeling state, then we just can't give permission for our feelings to become our guides in reality. And so that's where it all begins. I think if we're not integrated, then we're either going to be too deeply disempowered because our feelings are just making us feel closed off from our potential. And we think that the gap is too big to merge the two, the inner state of what we're experiencing and what we're experiencing externally. Or we're going to be feeling like we just have to be doing things a certain way in the more masculine sense and not give any authority to our feelings because those feelings are dangerous. Maybe they're going to topple, our entire reality because what we've created is already a false construct. And so that's really the question we need to ask ourselves. If we're brutally honest with ourselves, are we experiencing connection and love towards everything in our life? Or if we experience a frequency of love internally, would that demand that we make changes? Because if we can't support a frequency of love internally, which is purely a state of alignment and integration between the masculine and feminine polarities, that would require us to be experiencing the same all around us. And if that isn't our experience, then something's got to change. But this can be a very triggering point for people because obviously we like to mask the discomfort with more disassociation, with more distractions, people just adding in certain elements in their 3D realities, like certain toxic relationships or drugs or substances, or just doing things to escape the truth of what we're feeling because we want to be masking this egoic illusion, when in reality, the safest thing to do would be to just confront our own darkness and to realize if we can't integrate within, we're never going to feel integrated with our reality. So that's one of the strongest messages I think we all need to integrate.
Yeah, and you mentioned the magic word of intuition. And when you were an 8th grader, you wrote a newspaper column about intuition, and you started saying, an invisible figure stands by each person with an intention to lead them toward creating optimal decisions and accomplishments. That's coming from an 8th grader. That's coming from the field, let's say. And I was wondering, as you mentioned the invisible figure, I was wondering if it was just a metaphor, or when you were that young, were you actually seeing invisible figures around people that were guiding them to make better decisions in the form of intuition?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm surprised you found that article, because to me that there's different interpretations for that. When I was writing those pieces, I wanted to see how would people also perceive these deep metaphors? Because for me, everything is perceived energetically, and there's different interpretations from person to person. So for some people, intuition could literally be the presence of a guide. Maybe they're imagining that there is a spirit guide or a spirit animal or some presence, which could be even in the form of maybe a loved one that's passed on and they're receiving through some archetype or some physical form or entity, the wisdom that they need to be integrating. And so that can be a very interesting experience to receive that kind of intuitive guidance. But what I'm really feeling into is, imagine like an altered self, which is this higher self, which you can perceive as a part of you that is all-knowing in nature, part of you that you can fully confide in. That invisible self is like a hologram that you can imagine existing in your reality at all times, that if you surrender to, has your best interests in mind. And we can imagine this figure as somebody that would do the absolute best for us, would always have our best interests, and would lovingly approach everything that we're doing, thinking, and intending. And so if we even conjure up an image of ourselves in the most balanced state, with this beautiful merger of the heart, mind, consciousness, and masculine and feminine energy, we can imagine how we would look and feel and entertain with all of the possibilities in reality if we would be this version of ourselves. So intuition could even be relating to this holographic version of the self in a way that is loving and trusting in nature. We can build a relationship with intuition by imagining that if we have this invisible figure, which is quite literally our higher self, or maybe this version of us that we can start to embody, to develop a sense of deep trust and recognizing that this actually exists within us. In a way, we can just start to create a new version of ourselves that we can consciously relate to with love and with self-trust, when we choose to perceive that this wisdom is actively within us, because we're a receiver of this wisdom. If we are consciousness, which is one of my favorite concepts to explore, we can see ourselves as a fractal of source. And if we're a fractal of source, we literally have like a God self within us. We have an ability to be an antenna, to see ourselves as a divine instrument, which means that the difference between a physical self that is completely lost, distracted, hopeless, and a version of ourselves that is completely empowered, knowing, conscious in nature, is the difference between us feeling like we are that versus feeling separate from it. This is one of the most rapid shifts of consciousness that we can partake in. It's the choice to move from a state of being disassociated from consciousness itself to feeling like we are consciousness. And that starts to magically bring us into alignment in very interesting ways. Because by choosing to just open yourself up to receiving, what you're doing is bringing yourself into this feminine state of aligning. And actually, that in and of itself is masculine and feminine in nature. Because think of it, in order to be receiving, you're choosing to go into the feminine state, where the feminine we can think of as an archetype is a carrier of wisdom. The divine feminine receives, and even physiologically, like the womb of the feminine, that is allowing your energy to be received and to give birth to creation. We can start to unlock our ability to hold space for wisdom by seeing ourselves as a carrier of this divinity. If you're either a man or a woman, you can become a portal of this clarity But to do that energetically, you need to be allowing yourself to be open, to be receptive. So think about that in terms of a field potential. We need to not just be rigid and think that we're this like brick of a human persona in order to allow for movement of energy, to allow ourselves to actually be this antenna. And even just the intention to make that happen allows us to start to open up our third eye and to bring this wisdom in through our higher selves through this higher dimensional communication. And physically, that actually starts to allow us to become conduits of the scalar energy coming through the scalar field, the Dirac sea, we could say, of higher dimensional information to our brain, which is really a holographic receiver of information. This is something very subtle, but people often don't realize that by setting an intention, you are emitting a frequency. You're emitting scalar waves, actually entering the scalar field, which allows you to then receive this information to become a conduit of the two-way street. And so if you're just feeling like you are a fixed physical self, you don't sustain that communication. You don't allow yourself to be receiving at the same time. And then where the masculine aspect comes in is in actually allowing yourself to communicate that. So giving the intention to the field is a masculine act of putting out a frequency that requires an exertion of energy and a solid intention, not just to receive, not just to wait for something to come, but to actually allow yourself to sustain that interaction, to feel like you are relating to consciousness, like you're giving of an intention, to then be holding the wisdom that comes through you. So in this way, we can be both embodying this divine masculine and divine feminine archetype to experience energetic balance and exchange. And then through doing so, we then achieve the same kind of interaction in our relationships, in different situations, which allows us to manifest. It allows us to receive abundance, and everything else that accompanies the 3D experience is more easily achieved if we can become accustomed to both giving and receiving in these subtle ways.
And I'm still imagining the higher self. And, we've been told that one of the main universal laws is the law of free will. And I'm seeing the higher self as if they are sort of partaking in this earthly experience through us and viewing from a higher dimension, from a higher aspect. Are they equipped as well with free will, as are we? And are we both? Let me try to word it in a different way. Can the free will of that higher self influence our own free will here in this dimension? And would we call that as well? Would we call that destiny?
It's a really interesting question. This is kind of an experience that I've heard and I myself have experienced in the past in a more psychedelic journey, an experience of holding space for the higher self to be communicating its wisdom, and even realizing that what you're experiencing in the lower dimensional plane is allowing the higher self to ascend. So I think that this game, this experience of being a soul incarnating in a lower dimensional plane, is something that is shared simultaneously on higher dimensional levels. I see the soul as occupying different planes at the same time, which means that you are actually experiencing a higher version of reality at the same time, entangled in real time with your lower dimensional avatar self. So as you're changing your relationship with reality in the 3D, simultaneously you are allowing for ascension of the higher self. Because I believe we can think of this cosmic journey as an interactive state of being entangled across these different dimensional scales at the same time, like an accordion of consciousness, which is unfolding when you're choosing to actually balance yourself out and achieve a higher frequency state. So let's say the higher self is giving us input that allows us to ascend, to evolve in this lower dimensional plane. What that can feel like is you're receiving an intuitive download, or you're receiving clarity about your purpose here. So clearly we came down here as a soul, theoretically, to be achieving progress in some way. Maybe there is an inability to take wisdom that we know on the higher dimensional plane and to actually breed action and empowered action in the lower dimensional plane. Let's say we have awareness that needs to be applied. We want to be creating certain changes in the 3D, but we're afraid to do so, which is a common theme that I see among very conscious souls. There is awareness, but perhaps they're using that awareness to drive suffering. Maybe they're alienating themselves, or they're not allowing themselves to be leaders, which is really the shift that is needed for New Earth consciousness to expand in the collective. We need to take the ideas, the clarity, the awareness, the wisdom, and to allow it to create new systems, to shape change in the collective consciousness, not just to where we feel that change and we just want to separate ourselves from the matrix entirely, but to actually bring that into the matrix to sustain development. And I think that's the real challenge. I feel like we're going to keep coming back to this matrix environment if we're not allowing ourselves to be our higher selves in physical form. That's a real challenge, because when it comes to embodying our truth, we often face the challenge of feeling opposition, resistance. People aren't going to accept us. Due to the conforming nature of the matrix structure, many people are afraid of what's going to happen if they choose to bring their soul into physical form. And that involves a lot of different things. To be your soul in physical form, if you come with this depth and range of wisdom and intuition and purpose and divine abilities, then you're going to have to speak up about that. A lot of people are challenged by the throat chakra experience because that requires you being both embodied in the throat chakra, which is entangled with the sacral chakra. The sacral chakra is the creative center. It's where the fire is stoked internally. Once you open up your sacral ability, you start to feel this heat of the passion and inspiration that comes through when you're connected to your higher self. There's going to be a feeling of you need to do certain things. Maybe the physical self or the ego decides these things are not safe to do. Hence, you might be reflecting on your childhood experiences, your trauma. And perhaps then we can say on the larger level, the soul chose to experience certain traumatic circumstances to transmute that pain, that resistance, that egoic illusion of needing to stay stuck and conforming to some egoic illusion, as opposed to transmuting that into potential and then allowing yourself to be expressive of both the sacral potentiality, which connects to the throat, which allows you to express your truth and become your soul in physical form. And that might involve leadership positions. That might involve you doing something actively, being a creator in your reality, choosing a certain path that maybe your parents or your family or society has never encouraged for you. Essentially, it's the leap from a mode of comfort zone, complacency, and fear into a mode of being fiercely yourself. And that's a real challenge, because if you choose to go there, you have to abolish the need to be attached to all these different standards and conditions that might have previously been very tempting and might have kept you in a zone of being secluded to your own fears and conditioning biases. So I see this really as the shift, like you were asking, from the 3D to the 5D that a lot of people are needing to make. Once you contact the truth of your spirit, you need to go full force into the direction in which your soul is guiding you. And so that's going to be coming through in every moment. It's going to be like a relationship that unfolds over time, in which you constantly receive clarity, which then allows you to connect with the right people that are all existing at the same frequency, making you a match to higher realm possibilities, abundance, freedom, creativity, beautiful relationships, and really experiencing union with yourself that is reflected in every other aspect of your reality. And if we're not experiencing that, we can say that we're still conforming to the egoic illusion. And so I think that when we choose to embody the truth of our higher self, the higher self then starts to ascend. Maybe there are higher levels in this game, and maybe we keep expanding into these higher octaves of consciousness, and there are higher dimensions to experience, and perhaps theoretically, maybe the soul can escape this loop of samsara eventually and just be in a space of, etheric oneness. Maybe that is the archetypal journey we all go through when we come down here and experience different archetypes, different roles, suffering, different expressions of consciousness, and eventually experience a state of limitless, pure beingness and oneness. And I feel that's really the goal, but it comes through integrating whatever we're currently here to deal with. And so that awareness is vital to understanding how to ascend throughout whatever journey that you're currently going through.
Now, how would our experience of physicality shift or change once we allow more of that soul to drop into the human body? Will we have a different experience of matter? Will we be stepping more into light bodies, as we've heard? What are your views on that? What do you think will be coming when we inhabit more of our soul and house it in the body? Or is it, similar? Can we say in that way, or how do you see it?
Yeah, everything you just said is definitely relevant. The first thing that happens is you experience a higher frequency state. So very often when people go through some spontaneous shift in consciousness, you could call a quantum leap. Maybe you receive new awareness. You might have some spontaneous transformative experience, like a near-death experience, or perhaps a psychedelic journey, or a Kundalini awakening, or something rapidly shifts in your reality where you intake spiritual awareness rapidly and wake up to the truth of your higher self being a factor in your field of awareness. Because you sustain this higher frequency within your field, you start to need more of that higher frequency in every aspect of your life. For example, you might start to not align with lower frequency foods. Maybe you'll feel like you're not drawn to junk food, processed food, Sometimes even grounding foods are not appealing to people going through a spiritual journey. Maybe you might go vegetarian overnight, or something may happen where you feel like you don't want to be interacting or ingesting these certain variables that you would experience on a more lower frequency level of reality. The other thing that can happen is you start to quite literally vibrate out of certain relationships, friendships, experiences in which you were previously entangled with people that you manifested from your lower frequency state. And so you might feel like your relationship becomes dull because your partner doesn't understand you when you're at that higher frequency level. You may start to seek higher level interactions. And then you're going to be a match to higher frequency solutions, partnerships, and other ingredients in your reality. So when your physical body starts to hold this higher frequency, you also start to experience an awakening of abilities. So that's really the nature of the higher frequency state. When you're moving up, you can say that the chakra system, every chakra has a frequency level and range to it. So essentially the lower chakra is the root, the sacral, the solar plexus, they hold a lower frequency wavelength, essentially. And so when you're operating in the lower frequency states, you're a match to those experiences. That's why you would be in this primal mode where that red and orange energy really takes over. In that zone, you experience more lust, more greed, more hunger for the material things, more attachment and connection. Meanwhile, if you're moving up this frequency spectrum, you start to experience more compassion, more in your heart. Then you start to experience maybe a third eye activation where you start to physically see certain things. So the interesting thing that can come along with the experience of awakening is you start to physically arouse the ability to be a visionary. You may have more lucid dreams. You may start to have certain visions. Maybe you have no idea where this stuff is coming from, but you start to just recall certain things or have ideas or maybe memories and connections to your higher self, which come through in the visual sense. That's because the pineal gland starts to activate, and physically, that then becomes the conduit to higher dimensional awareness. Again, connecting to the scalar field of potentiality, bringing in new awareness that your brain can decode as a visual piece of feedback. And then upwards of that would be the crown chakra, of course. So that would be giving you a connection to the higher self. And so when you're in this crown chakra and higher chakra system of awareness, you're experiencing a likeness to the self. Many people associate this experience with a physical sense of lightening, feeling not as attached to the lower dimensional plane, feeling more energy, feeling more radiant. And we can physically see these changes reflected in the auric field, even to the extent that people are activating their rainbow body or their light body of consciousness, which is something that can physically be seen if we use certain devices that are measuring scalar energy potentiality and biofeedback tools. We can track coherence and look at how the field is lighting up and responding to this acuity within our own field. And so that's a beautiful transformation that can happen. And as we allow ourselves to be in this higher state of consciousness, our field only continues to expand in potentiality. The heart field also expands many, many times, and we start to experience ourselves not just in terms of a mental field, where previously the brain might be the main field of consciousness ruling our reality. When the heart starts to expand, that magnetically draws in so many more possibilities because we start to physically operate in the frequency of love. And to me, that's really indicative of this 5D consciousness, because to be in an energy of love is not just to be in love, which is what most people in the 3D sense associate with the state of love. It's not infatuation. It's not chemistry. It's not just connection to this person that you make the object of love. Being in the frequency of love is being in a state of total connection, total divinity. It's being everything all at once. It's being etheric in nature. It's actually experiencing yourself as a soul. And if you are enmeshed with your own soul, you're also experiencing yourself as the soul of the universe. There is no way to really distinguish between the energy of everything and the energy of yourself, because you quite literally dissolve that egoic barrier that creates separation between you and everything else in existence. So that's a beautiful state of compassion where you physically feel in love with reality. You don't experience judgment at that point. You experience animals as being part of your family and nature as being, an extension of you. You might be taking a walk and experience such a profound samadhi moment of feeling like everything is alive and is an expression of the living one organism. And that's such a loving state to experience, where at that point in time, anyone that you meet, you might start to see as a teacher or as a connection to you in some shape and form, teaching you a deeper lesson of oneness and integration. And so at that point, kind of the lower frequency variables just vibrate out of your reality. You will not be a match to them. You keep climbing this ladder of the frequency range and even stop experiencing that stark resistance to what you previously regarded as being extra or separate from you. And so I think that we can even use our triggers and the things that we currently feel in resistance to guide us towards this ability to activate our field and to come into a state of oneness. Because whatever we feel is really separate from us in the now moment that evokes aggression, anger, pain, any kind of hostility, guides us to understand what needs to be integrated within the self to then come into this experience of love or unity consciousness. And if we can see that the external is just a mirror of our own consciousness, we can then understand how can we give ourselves the experience of love, forgiveness, acceptance, soulful integration, to understand the meaning behind all of these external precursors that are really guiding us to soulful integration. And so that then ends up achieving this goal that I'm talking about, which is activating the field, raising your frequency to no longer experience anything as lesser than or separate from you, which doesn't invoke a responsivity and reactivity, but essentially just moving into a state of understanding the purpose behind that and then choosing to value it as part of the growth journey.
And shifting our awareness into the younger generations, you're talking about the energy centers of the body. I've heard you say that young people have a deficit in solar plexus alignment. And, even I'm looking around me. I have, maybe some friends in my group that are going through tough times, unmotivated, can't find that sense of purpose, apathetic, don't want to get out of bed, playing video games. What does the solar plexus have to do in all of this? And how can we get these young people to align themselves again and operate more from the higher centers into their creativity and into their mission in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really important place to begin when it comes to this ascension journey, because the solar plexus is essentially the core of the self. It's the reason why if you're experiencing anxiety or fear or a deeply rooted energetic blockage, that you might feel that as a knot in your stomach. Very often people experience that as the place of the deepest resistance, the place of true unconsciousness, because if you're not aligned with your solar plexus, you don't really know who you are. And then you start to act from this robotic autopilot state of thinking you know who you are from the mind, and then just being run by the primal instincts. And so the solar plexus is where it all begins. If you feel comfortable with yourself down there, you can experience that fire, that ignition of the potential that I mentioned. And from there is really the rise of creativity and also the ability to take the sacral energy, which is right beneath the solar plexus, and to bring that then into the heart, because the solar plexus is the bridge between the heart chakra and the sacral center. So if that bridge is distorted, if there is fear there, if there are programs which initially lay the template for this resistance toward authentic expression, we cannot become the conduit for this purposeful action. We cannot see how what we're feeling deep down, inspired to do, can become the source of love and authentic expression in our reality. So for young people that don't feel like they know who they are, or maybe are afraid of embracing themselves, the first question to ask is, what are you actually afraid of? And that might bring up very specific things, such as maybe the fear of being judged, a fear of resistance, maybe a fear of disappointing someone or something, not conforming to societal expectations, family, friends. Definitely there's a lot of conditional templates and ramifications in society, which is why young people feel the need to just party, to drink, to do certain things which are distracting activities, which can lead away from the real evolutionary journey into the self to understand what are you here to be achieving. When young people gain this attachment to distraction, to social media, to digital narcissism, to doing things that they think need to be done as opposed to part of the felt experience, this typically leads maybe 10, 20 years down the road to a moment of real disappointment when they realize, they never really found themselves or understood the path to wholeness. And so that leads to a beautiful midlife crisis typically, when the young person understands that because of those coping mechanisms, they developed an aversion to their true self, which can lead to deeply rooted resentment, maybe towards the people that initially created that conditioning in their subconscious mind, which they ended up conforming to, which ended up limiting them along this self-exploration path. So to begin, we need to think about what really is our identity. For a young person, it's easier to understand this than for somebody that's been living from, this persona for most of their life. For a young person, it's important to understand, who are you as a unique individual? In this way, like a fractal of source. What is your unique archetype? Who were you before the conditioning, before all of the trauma, before anything that you experienced that created the template for who you think you need to be? And so very often there are certain innate abilities which are connected to this experience of the true self. Maybe you want to be more of a visionary or creative, or maybe what you learned in school or in college or were reinforced to do is not what you really want to be experiencing. So the solar plexus is where you start to awaken this desire to really be the true self, which can be experienced as this boldness, this passion, and a really powerful energy of intention, beneath which is just the true self, choosing to do what it wants to do in order to achieve expansion. So if we're asking ourselves the question, what do we really want to do? If not for the fear, if not for the conditioning, if money was not a problem, the answer that arises is going to be the most authentic thing that we can achieve within the solar plexus center. That then connects us to our heart, and it brings us to a place of recognizing that if we're not connected to our true sense of self, then we're not going to be experiencing unconditional love in our reality, which is a very jarring thing to realize. If we're already experiencing a conditionality behind what we think we need to be doing to experience ourself in the world, then there's going to be a disconnect. And so young people need to think about, if they eliminate the distractions, if they don't go to the party, if they put down the video games and social media, if they just put themselves in a place of total self-integration, almost like being with your own inner child, what are you going to start to realize really reflects your true self in that moment? What have you been trying to escape or run away from? And if it's something that you're fearing in that moment, that's actually good. That needs to be understood, because that fear is the limiting block that doesn't allow you to step into an embodied state of purpose. And so many young people, I think they're afraid of their aloneness. And that's one of the most scary aspects of the narcissistic society that we live in. People are not really taught to be with themselves, generally. We're taught to just orchestrate reality from this mental place of doing, not really being. And the essence of consciousness is being. So to learn our own consciousness, we need to allow ourselves to be. We need to literally sit with ourselves, go introspective, understand who are we and what do we really love. And if no one gave us the ability to do that, we need to give ourselves the gift of that presence and start to regard our aloneness as the most sacred experience we could have, to understand our own soul. Without that loving relationship, there is no way to even understand the point of the solar plexus, which is the real home of this authenticity. And so that's really the bridge that I think we need to consciously create to allow our young self to mature into a more conscious, loving identity that can support the experience of solar plexus integration.
And when you were pondering about who you were at your core, you said that you were a soul coming from a different time and place to share a certain awareness. And I was really curious when I heard that, knowing that you've done so much internal exploration, have you tapped into any insight or any knowing of where that time and place that you came from is as a soul? Have you experienced that?
So the most specific experience that I've had was I did have a QHHT session done on me. So that's a Dolores Cannon quantum hypnosis regressive technique, which is a two-part experience, really. One aspect of it is jumping into some past lives, which bear significance to your current incarnation. The other aspect is channeling the higher self.
Yeah.
One of the questions which I asked my practitioner when I went through this experience a couple of years back was, do I really need to know about my past lives? Is this an important aspect of my experience? Do I need a practitioner to go through this kind of regressive experience of entangling with the higher self, or can I do this myself? And what's kind of funny about this is that my higher self was very clear to say that you don't need a practitioner to do this kind of work. You simply need to trust and to open up your field to receive the clarity that is there at all times. So I had multiple past life experiences, which gave me some insight about who I was on planet Earth as a stoic being, going through different moments of experiencing deep wisdom, but being somewhat afraid or feeling repressed when it comes to expanding it, because obviously we can think historically about all the moments when wisdom was suppressed, when souls, especially bearing deep wisdom, higher consciousness, were oppressed societally. I mean, clearly we have many historical moments, from the witch hunts to, many experiences in which these sorts of spiritual beings were feared societally. And to this day, they are often feared and seen as superstitiously or, supernaturally. There's something off with a being that is sharing such expansive information. And that's something that also I see in many people. that incarnate with this deep wisdom, there's past life trauma associated with that. And so we need to think about if we're coming back to this matrix in our current 21st century environment, there is less oppression than there was in the past. But very often we can experience such a soul level memory of that oppression and resistance that we are afraid to currently unleash that same wisdom that maybe we've been inheriting already lifetime after lifetime. So I've also been experiencing that specifically. I also feel that maybe I've been going through this kind of carousel ride on planet Earth sometimes in the past, and I've experienced the need to express. But there's been some deeply seated fear because maybe that wisdom wasn't something that the collective consciousness could really accept. But I think we're moving into a time when that becomes much more acceptable. Hence, many more people are doing this kind of work of expressing and stepping into conscious leadership positions to do this work. But when it comes to the other multidimensional aspect of things, I mean, I've always felt like I'm a different being. I don't like to attach identities to this because I think it's part of the spiritual egotism trap. People constantly talking about their starseed origin, their galactic self.
I'm a Pleiadian.
Exactly.
Let's leave it.
I think these labels are quite useless because, you know, if you start to attach like this egotism or identifying with yourself as somewhat above other souls, there's no point in that. It doesn't even allow you to be at the level of allowing for expansion to happen. So I've always felt different. I receive many different theories about who I am. A lot of people think I'm an indigo or maybe a rainbow. It's sort of a soul, a child, because it's basically a difference in my energetic field, which leads to...
I'm a chocolate soul.
We might as well say that, exactly. These are all labels, and there's no point in really attributing the identity to them. But I think we're also all multidimensional souls. So if we get to that point of seeing that nobody's really like not a multidimensional spirit in a human self, we're all a soul. We all come from different places outside of this time-space matrix that allows us to hold space for the diversity in this experience. And of course, some souls are maybe older, more mature, wiser than other souls, but it's really just a matter of experience, I think. And maybe if we see ourselves as being like one fractal, one expression of the larger soul, then we can look at souls that maybe are less evolved, less conscious, less aware, in a more compassionate way, and maybe see that they are a less mature version of ourselves. Maybe we were at that level of awareness at some point along our own evolutionary journey. And that maybe will be the bridge to deeper empathy and compassion, which is what planet Earth really needs. The real separation that's happening is people regarding themselves as greater than, more conscious, more aware, leading to more of this clashing of interests. Meanwhile, if we can step into an energy of choosing to use our consciousness to bring more empathy, to bring more love and healing to those who are in need of it, I think we can encourage the oneness experience. And that's so vital. So I just feel that I came here to encourage this transition, to wake people up to their true potential, to allow people to see their and feel their own soul, which is something that is very etheric in nature. And we need to be really in touch with the feeling nature of reality, as opposed to just the mental construct, which is, again, a feminine state of integration. So I believe that's why I'm definitely a woman. I feel like I chose the female expression to be able to support this loving kind of feminine role of encouraging people to be more in their heart space and even using my frequency to guide this experience for people. But that's not to say that, you know, I'm different or above so many other people that are achieving this process of integration through their individual experience.
And I feel like Dolores Cannon is out here somewhere in this conversation because she just came to mind again, and it was regarding this book that she put together of the 3 waves of volunteers, and how as humanity is going through this split in consciousness, there was a calling out to the universe. Hey, we need some more souls over here and on planet Earth to help in this transition. So where do you see is the deeper purpose now that, you know, we're having newer children, you know, incarnate into the planet with this extreme level of wisdom and light in their body, in their you can see it in their eyes. What is the deeper purpose in that, and why now?
I think this is all part of the natural balance that needs to exist in the collective. A lot of people are saying this time is really the most scary time for humanity. In many ways, what people are experiencing now is a war on consciousness, a spiritual battle, if you will. a time of splits, the shift of the 3D versus the 5D. So think of it as we're dealing with the existential crisis of more AI, more of a disconnect, this kind of narcissistic edge society is experiencing that I spoke on. Then we need to have the opposite end of the spectrum increasing just as much as the other end of the spectrum, which is leading to the shadow in the collective consciousness. So with more separation, we also have to deal with more acceptance and integration on the other side. And so I think that this new earth reality, what that's going to be breeding is almost a utopian new value system, which is given birth to through new children, through new vehicles of awareness. And the souls that are awakening are going to be so integrated, so loving, so supportive of a higher intelligence and more connection and love on planet Earth, that it's going to be balancing out the spectrum, maybe leading to an experience in the future in which there's almost like two Earths at the same time, where the split is so stark that some people are experiencing a reality which is so limited in nature, so dystopian. Meanwhile, other people in some other places, maybe physical locations and just energetically, will be experiencing such bliss, such unity, healing, new technologies, new forms of interaction, even telepathy, coming back to a state of, real soulful alignment to such a degree that we're experiencing like soul families come together. And as part of those soul families, new souls and old souls coming back in beautiful new bodies with these same abilities will bring more harmony into these systems, which support the Earth's frequency. So I think on a larger scale, it's kind of a metaphor for how the Schumann resonance also functions. Like the Earth has its own pulsation, its own beat to it. The heartbeat of planet Earth needs to be in balance. And so if we're seeing that there are so many things that affect the Schumann resonance in a more adverse way, from different biological tools that are implemented in order to affect the Earth's pulse electromagnetically on a collective scale, and technologies and different frequencies, even bioweaponry, we can say, that's affecting the Earth as a whole, then what's supporting the balancing out of that is souls that are then raising their own frequency to not be as affected to that shift in the Earth's frequency, which can be perceived in a more negative or manipulative way. And so we need to keep our frequency elevated because the Earth's frequency is changing. And so I think that souls that come into this time-space matrix now are naturally adjusting to that to support the collective evolutionary journey. And definitely, I think more and more people are now even choosing conscious relationship models, more and more stepping into union. There's a beautiful experience of now more awakened souls that are choosing to transmute the generational trauma and break out of some of these karmic programs collectively across the world, choosing to come together in harmony, and then having children in these conscious relationships are going to be beautiful children that we can say maybe are starseeds, or children that are born to also have new roles in supporting this new Earth consciousness. And so we have to think about what legacy are we going to impart on this planet? If we're now parenting in a new way and stepping into these conscious unions, then our children are going to be the messengers to spread this message collectively and generationally, create a whole new template for planet Earth. Meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, children might be, espousing more and more toxic narcissistic tendencies, the ones that are growing up, looking at iPads since 2 years old and not understanding the nature of love and the need for compassion. Their reality is going to be much, much darker and less integrated than those that are experiencing a higher value system. But both are going to be experiencing life on planet Earth at the same time. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the next generations will evolve, the new kinds of educational means that are going to develop, and really the difference between the union models and the family structure between kind of the souls in the old paradigm world and the souls in the new paradigm. That's going to wake up, new potential in the next decades to follow. So there's going to be a lot of changes that I'm curious to see and to support the more conscious side of the spectrum for sure.
Yeah, and it's not the first time that humans have pondered a better society or a utopian world. I know you mentioned that in the 1700s, Sir Francis Bacon wrote a novel called The New Atlantis. And I was wondering, if we've been thinking about this golden age for so long, why has there been failed attempts before? And how can we avoid whatever happened in the past to not tune into that potential, but actually make it through this time?
Wow, it's a really deep question. Well, I think in this attempt, we can try to do things slightly differently, which haven't been attempted before. And I think there's been this intention to create utopias that's been destroyed by some collective mechanisms which are still egoic in nature, still controlling and deceitful to an extent, which to me embodies cult consciousness. So if I had to sum this up, I think, even the attempts to create new Atlantis and certain higher models of evolution. One of the failures in the past has been that this has led to certain like hive mind collectives, which still had some control mechanisms supporting them, which are not really decentralized in nature. So what I see happening, the shift subtly into the future, is more of a decentralized approach, which I kind of feel into as like an anti-cult. An anti-cult would be a system in which there is no power structure, there's no hierarchy, there's no centralized ruler or leader that's dictating that they are above the system or they know it all. It's more of like a conscious soul formation, like a soul family, we can say, that is driven by certain values and ideals to create a society in which integration is possible, where everyone has a different role, but no one is above the other. That kind of cooperative model can really enable true compassion, true sharing of wisdom, energetic exchange, and both the masculine and feminine energies balanced in synergy, expressed in this way that's even closer to a matriarchy than a patriarchy, I would say, because I think the feminine consciousness should be in the lead in terms of just allowing for that supportive energy of loving integration and receptivity. That should be maybe slightly dominating over the masculine, whereas our society right now is more dominating in the masculine sense. And what I feel intuitively is that in the past, all these attempts have still been slightly more masculine in nature. There's been slightly like a feel of superiority, or maybe somebody still controlling these solutions to try to create a utopian model. That in and of itself creates imbalance, because I think if we're trying to create a utopia, we're excluding the possibility that that might become a dystopia, because possibly the most horrifying aspect of this is that every dystopia begins with a utopian intention. Every cult begins with a desire to create a new world. Jim Jones' cult, which led to the infamous Kool-Aid mass suicide, began with the intention to create New Earth. And we all know how that ended. So that's the kind of framework and the intention behind a cult formation, which needs to be done away with. I think if we're trying to create a New Earth consciousness, we need to create a decentralized framework for conscious living and being, a model in which we're just supported to be our soul, which has certain innate qualities and values, which are going to be promoted on a mass scale. And so maybe there will be certain communities that shape up and develop with these kind of frameworks for education, for conscious living, for the experiences of union and new family structures. And politically, maybe certain changes can set in the future, which allow for a more decentralized approach. But this is definitely something that needs to be considered in terms of the systemic frameworks right now and their limitations. So I think that quite possibly we're going to see the evolution of different kinds of ways of being in the future, where there will be this old paradigm ruling the earth to an extent, but the new earth will be coexisting in a way where we can actively see that there are certain mechanisms at play, but we just choose to operate in our own framework of consciousness. And that makes all the difference. So we don't need to necessarily disassociate from the matrix, from the conditions, from some of the dystopian mechanisms at play collectively in order to experience this higher realm. There is no need to separate or fragment from the whole in order to experience our state of utopia, because the utopia we're really looking for begins within. It's that intention, it's that frequency. It's a way of not choosing to resist what is to experience the shift in consciousness. And that's really the issue that I see in many people, trying to be in this 5D dimension of thinking, but still vehemently battling the current reality, the status quo. And if there's that resistance to what is, there can never be a transmutation of the energy. It's kind of a game that we might play to fool ourselves into thinking that we are above the distortion, or maybe we want to break out of the matrix because we think this is like some kind of prison planet. Again, I think part of the illusion. It's not a prison planet. It's a really complex landscape in which we can experience ourselves relative to what is. And so the past attempts, I think, that have failed have been really about establishing a new world as somewhat of a separate construct. And if that separation happens, then the other side eventually splits so oppressively and aggressively that it ends up creating a war, and that war eventually ends in a destructive way. So I think we shouldn't try to create a separate world in terms of a utopia, which might become dystopian in nature when we start to ascertain the split. We should try to be integrating into the old world, bringing in new frequencies, bringing in this higher dimension in a way that allows for coexistence and freedom, and just allowing us to be kind of experiencing a higher dimension, but in the lower dimensional plane. And I think that's a way to kind of rise above the challenges that previously have not been incorporated into our dimension of the felt experience.
And there's been a lot of lost knowledge. You know, you mentioned that the Vatican, for example, there's so many documents that are hidden that have not been risen to the surface because of control. Let's just put it simply. And I know you're someone that's very fascinated in the realms of healing, and there's been a lot of healing technologies that have been hidden away for so many years that are beginning to start coming up more and more to the surface, which I believe will also be integrated into this new world that is being created as we ascend and we realize, these are our vessels, these are our vehicles of consciousness, and we need to take care of them. You mentioned once that the pyramids were resonance technologies. Does that have anything to do with healing?
Definitely. I think that they are both metaphors for the resonance technologies of the human spirit and how we can come into alignment as a harmonic, multidimensional organism. And at the same time, I think there's certain really unique qualities to the pyramids, which can allow us to experience our multidimensional selves. But my personal belief is that they were once activated and they were once complete in nature, which today they're not completely coherent. They are not intact entirely like they initially were, because I really view the pyramids as living, breathing instruments. I think that they can be experienced as an organism. Like each aspect of the pyramids is kind of like an organ or an organelle. And the structures are almost like chakras. And so different aspects of the pyramid are metaphors for the unity and the integration that can happen within our own selves. There's also an interesting intuitive vision that I've had about the pyramids as exemplifying the real journey of consciousness development and how divine primordial consciousness was seeded into the physical world. For example, how language was given birth to. Because the pyramid to me is like a vessel transmitting the multidimensional nature, the higher dimensional plane, into the physical world. It captures that etheric energy and information, and it allows for, via the resonance chamber formation within the pyramid structure, it allows for spoken word. It's like it takes that multidimensional information and it translates it into a frequency, which can then be interpreted by the human brain and becomes a language, becomes something that we can internalize as being a part of the physical self and an expression of consciousness. So to me, the pyramids are like vehicles of transmitting this multidimensional information in the physical realm. And I believe that they are still supporting the Earth's frequency. But in the past, I feel that they were much more connected to the other pyramid structures around the world. I really perceive a collective grid framework where every pyramid is connected to other structures, small pyramids all around the world. Even the obelisks. I believe that those two are metaphors and physical landmarks connecting to the Earth's grid. Because if we see the formation and location of all these different pyramidal structures, we can see really they're like on touch points of the Earth's electromagnetic grid, in interesting spots on ley lines and on different locations that are allowing for energy to be transmitted in very unique configurations, which would possibly be supporting the Earth's frequency, the Schumann resonance. But I think there's a really, really deep metaphor there and a connection to how this was initially seeded, how consciousness became part of the human experience and even possibly informed genetically the human being. There's a lot of secrets connected to ancient Egypt, of course, and my sense connected to it is that even the human being, if we think of the human as a specimen, like where did the human organism really come from? I think genetically a lot of experiments were done in Egypt and connected to Egypt. We see a lot of things on the different walls and in different places around Egypt on sacred temples depicting genetic manipulation, different things showing DNA and even like human body parts, which would represent the reproductive process. And I think a lot of very deep experimentation was done surrounding the connection between sound, energy, frequency, the human genome, and the output, which is the human species, and how we internalize vibration and how we really correspond with the Earth's frequencies. To me, there was like a really, really deep connection there between the human template and our energetic field and how that was given rise to, which connects to extraterrestrial presence on planet Earth and just very, very interesting, mysterious aspects, which we can see just living on the walls today through all the hieroglyphics that are still maintained there. And so that's something that I often connect to Egypt, that these were both devices and instruments orchestrating the connection between consciousness and the human language and frequency outputs, but also that something physically was happening in Egypt, which allowed for the human being as we know today to be physically rendered in the way that we currently are. It's just my intuitive thought process. It's a very mysterious and enigmatic part of the human experience, but intuitively, that's what I think it's connected to.
And how do you think the human genome is affected by sound frequencies?
Completely affected. In terms of the human genome is connected to a frequency band of information. We really can connect to harmonic intelligence, we can say, via our own genome. And DNA is both expressed vibrationally and affected by vibration. This again connects to scalar energy potentiality, and really our DNA is played like music. And we can think of ourselves as real energetic and musical orchestras, because the way that our DNA is expressed is through the language of frequency and resonance. So if we want to change our genomic expression, we need to change the way that we physically synthesize and play our DNA. And there are some incredible scientists that have done work on this. One of my most favorite fields to examine is the field of linguistic wave genetics. There was a Russian scientist named Peter Garyaev who looked into specifically how we can change the transcription of DNA factors by allowing ourselves to experience frequency differently. And he physically did some experiments which were so profound in nature when he would scan actually people's photographs and produce a white noise, a kind of frequency, which was then audible to the human, connecting them to their healthy selves. So imagine taking a photograph of a young person, scanning that through a machine that picks up the frequency information connected to that actual photograph, and then beaming that back to the individual to allow their DNA to recall the memory of who they were prior to the manifestation of their physical chronic conditions, disease factors, or anything else that's leading to their now more, unhealed version of self. Why is this possible? So essentially, this brings us to the space of morphogenetic physics. And this is a really complex field to move into because it looks at the understanding of the human as part of a holographic field of information, where we actually have a morphic field surrounding the self. That morphic field holds the information vibrationally that allows for the physical transcription of the genes, that allows us to express ourselves. It holds the memory and the operating system for the physical being expression. And so think of it, if we were to experience ourselves now in an unhealed state, that means that something went awry between the connection of our morphic field and the physical self, where when we're born, our cells somehow know how to express themselves. There is that program which is allowing for healthy human functioning. If we connect back to that morphic field, which requires being in a certain harmonic range of coherence, then we can experience ourselves in that healthy state. And so there are now scalar technologies, scalar energy, plasma technologies, and different sound healing modalities, which allow us to come into a state of coherence by vibrationally reconnecting with our own morphic fields. And so everybody has a different kind of a song that their DNA plays. And so I believe that we will be moving into a time in the future when we can physically use healing tracks, potentially even music orchestrated for the body's genomic code, which will allow for healthy functioning of the cells, purely individualized based on the program that you individually express as a human being, which is something connected to your own holographic blueprint. And your DNA and your genome actually expresses itself as the music of prime numbers. So this gets into a very complex field of understanding, actually. How can this DNA potential be expressed as part of the binary code and part of a complex system of understanding how everything connects to a frequency, to a musical note, to a number. And that complex patterning allows for the transcription of a healthy genome. So this is obviously a rabbit hole to go down, but it's one that I think is a very promising field as we step into this holistic space in the future and explore more about the connection between energy, vibrational phenomena, and the human organism. Because really, there's no junk DNA as in terms of there are like random aspects of the DNA template which don't provide any functioning for the human. The junk DNA that we typically associate as being unnecessary is just unexplored potential. This is matter that needs to be decoded into unexpressed human potentiality. I think as we move more into the space of understanding the deep connection between vibrational phenomena and the human self, we can unlock certain dormant DNA possibilities, which just intuitively, I feel connects to ESP, extrasensory perception, and different higher strand DNA potentiality, which might be just unexpressed aspects of our genomic code. And so perhaps when we are going through the ascension process, unlocking this DNA potential, that's exactly what we're tapping into. Different dormant areas in our DNA code, which allows us to be experiencing ourselves in this more multidimensional way. So a very deep area to look into, but it's fascinating. And we're really just recalling this awareness because that's where it all began. That's what the pyramids connect to. That's what the initial sound healing chambers were all connected to, bringing the whole human into a state of coherence and resonance, which allows for healing in the way that the body remembers how to heal symbiotically via consciousness expansion, as opposed to trying to heal distortion on the physical level, because really consciousness is a top-down mechanism of integration as opposed to bottom-up, which is the more reductionistic way that we look at it today.
And I want to honor you for leading in that area of healing, because I know that as we progress, we're going to need more people that are stepping in with that level of understanding to create the new systems of healthcare, to create the new systems of education. So just honoring you first and foremost for that understanding. And one of the last things I wanted to get into in this beautiful mystical conversation is you said you love the term Omnism, which is seeing the truth of all religions. And where do you think that lies? Where is that center point that connects Christianity, Buddhism, all Hinduism, all the religions that we see out in the world? Of course, they hold deep, deep level of truths. Where do they all connect?
To me, Omnism even sounds like it's talking about the oneness of the whole organism. It's considering that consciousness is like one living, breathing being, which I can think of the universe being like one living, breathing organism that contains all of these smaller units of consciousness, all corresponding, all interacting to create an experience that gives rise to unity consciousness. To me, Omnism is the most integrative attempt to explain how every religious model, every ideology, every unique systemic framework that's ever been given rise to within the field of consciousness allows for this ultimate connection back to oneness. So Omnism is really about experiencing unity consciousness at this level that incorporates and sees the truth in every individual perspective. That's really the definition I would give to truth. It's the sum of all individual truths. It's taking every perspective and seeing that it really is an irrevocable part of the one. And so that's how we as an individual unit of consciousness can start to see ourselves as a loving observer of the whole. Religions to this day still maintain a very separatist approach. They're ruled by the desire to create superiority or supremacy in terms of one belief system is above the others, typically, even if it's just identifying that source is one deity or one kind of expression of the one. That attaches, I think, unnecessary labels and identifiers to something that is ethereal and all about beingness. There can be no labels attributed to consciousness because it's quite literally a sea of awareness. And so I think Omnism, where this can be expanded in the future to even include people that are perceiving truth in all the religions, truth in all of these systems that have ever been given birth to in consciousness, is as a system that is ruled by the science of consciousness. To me, Omnism is an attempt to merge science and spirituality because it's not just spiritual in nature, where even spirituality has often a kind of extremist orientation. That's usually implying one end of the spectrum. Meanwhile, scientism is the extreme other end of the spectrum, which kind of also is a religion if we think about it, where scientism is so reductionistic that it's anti-holism. It's just looking at the view of reality on a very fundamental and kind of small scale level, which is very narrow-minded. That's why so many people that are attached to scientism are even atheists. They don't believe in God or a source because they're so focused on the mind as being really the God in reality. And that too is so limited in nature. So whether we're too extreme in the spiritual land and we exclude science altogether, or we're too extreme in the spiritual domain or in the scientific domain, then we're both excluding the real art of integration. And so that's where Omnism gains a very balanced and grounded feel. It's if we can see that spirituality is something that needs to be grounded in nature. That's where we experience the whole self as being no different from any other self in existence. We can see ourselves as quite literally one unit of consciousness, one smaller scale representation of the macrocosmic whole. And that's where the cosmic identity can really be seated in every single person, to the extent that we can see that actually observation or perception is consciousness, whether it's the perception of an animal or an organism, or the perception of maybe a tree, or the perception of another human being that is entirely different from you. That perspective is a lens of consciousness, which means that is a lens of the creator. That is the creation and creator enmeshed in one organism. So omnism to me just has a feel of unification to such a profound extent that it does not exclude any one thing, because there isn't separation from that lens. It's something so holistic and all-encompassing that it allows us to see everything as a facet, like one larger structure that gives rise to a multifractal experience of oneness on every scale of reality. So I encourage everybody to think about how can they encompass this kind of all-encompassing perspective, which is really the experience of love. It's the experience of the dance of the divine masculine and feminine within the self. It's taking both into the integrative state of being enmeshed in reality, finding intimacy in your own self, in your own unit of consciousness, and experiencing everything else around you as an same cosmic dance. That's what gives rise to everything in existence, and can be regarded in a way if we choose to bring ourselves to that same origin within our own observation. So omnism, I think, is an attempt to produce a loving frequency by understanding this concept of oneness, not just at the mental level, but really deeply somatically, to find that love is the answer. Love is the reason why everything exists. And it's the way that we can ultimately come to entertain higher possibilities without needing to separate from anything that currently is, which provides really an experience of heaven on earth without needing to go anywhere or dissipate from any factor that currently is.
Gabi, thank you for emitting that frequency of love in your words, your energy, and everything that you're doing right now in the world and being. I would love to send people to connect with you. We end every podcast with a segment called The Final Trio. Hello, beautiful soul. If you made it up to here in this episode, I just wanted to jump on very quickly to let you know that we were having some technical difficulties with this episode. And it's a very funny story because neither Gabi nor I know exactly what was going on. It looked like her audio was perfect from her end, but when I was listening to it, there was a slight, let's call it interference. We both weren't able to locate the issue. We weren't able to locate the problem. So we just went with it. And Gabi is so intuitive that she actually had her camera on the side while she was shooting the interview. And she was shooting it on her camera simultaneously. So we were able to get all that footage with the audio from her camera and put it into this video. And then mysteriously about, right now we're an hour and 20 in, her camera shut off. And it was only her computer. So for the next 10 minutes, you're going to listen to a little bit of an interference with the audio. I was able to conduct the whole interview listening to Gabi's voice like that. Exactly. So now you can understand how it felt for me on my end. But there's some very beautiful gems in what she's about to share in the final trio. So I really hope that you stick around and treat this as like a code, like a Da Vinci code or Morse code that you're trying to decipher, because there are some parts where the audio overlaps, as I just mentioned. But if you stick through it, you'll be able to juice the wisdom and the essence that Gabi is transmitting. So I appreciate you all so much. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up on this video if you're enjoying the conversation. And subscribe to this channel if you are not already. I will see you on the next one. But first, I want to send people to connect in all the platforms necessary. You mentioned your TV show. We'll link that in the show notes. Where would you send people to know more about you and connect with you on a deeper level?
First of all, thank you for your kind words. Anywhere really, you can just type my name in Google and me on YouTube, on Instagram, website, GabiKovalenko.com. I post regularly. Every single day, you can find more consciousness expanding insight on a range of topics. I'm constantly trying to pique people's curiosity, just inspire deeper thought on all this range of different topics that we cover today and much more. So YouTube, I post every week, and I also do offer personal sessions. I connect with people individually that want to be accelerating their healing journey on just a one-time basis with me. So wherever you feel drawn to find me, you can just look me up, Insight, all over the internet. And so the show is going to be a good place to find deeper meaning in all these concepts, because they're really deep into explaining these different core themes of consciousness and really a journey of integrating this into the self. So that's probably a good place to begin. And then my YouTube channel is a place to find many topics, like I've mentioned. So I look forward to connecting with everybody that feels drawn to me and my energy there.
And even though you don't remember what you said in that TV show, we know it's going to be good.
Yeah, I've seen so far the first episode, so it's like coming back to me. I know that it touches on all these different, from understanding the self to understanding and consciousness integration. So it's a journey that we can explore together if we just try to remember ourselves, which is really the point of seeing the oneness in this experience, which is universal in nature. So that'll be an interesting experience for both me and the viewer simultaneously, I think.
Yeah. For the final trio, we have 2 questions that are personalized to the guests, and then the last one we ask at the end of every show. The first one is, what is the latest quantum jump that you experienced in your life?
Wow, really interesting question. Oh, okay, the latest quantum experienced. I just say the latest quantum jump I've experienced is probably moving just intentionally from the role that I've been choosing to espouse as kind of a thought leader, or doing the work that I'm currently doing, which initially the quantum jump was moving from just a student of this kind of world of science and integration, and somebody curious and tapping into my own abilities to express on this, to being more embodied in this role of delivering this information, to now moving into a higher state of integrating this to think about how solutions in this space. Myself now in a more entrepreneurial light. I actually have a degree, which I seldom talk about because it doesn't like a big part of my chosen identity, but I'm choosing to now integrate the part of me that wanted to get that business degree, that wanted to explore how to connect this awareness to the physical world, and how to network with people that are like-minded souls, and move into a really deep space of exploring how to generate these solutions together, which people need, not just in terms of speaking about this awareness, but actually physically embodying it and applying it in education with other solutions shaping up the world needs. So I think I'm moving into more of a leadership capacity, and it was just an internal shift that I to understand. I shouldn't just be taught this. There's another way of embodying this energy, which I'm learning to espouse, which is kind of the divine masculine orientation, which I realize can blend with the divine feminine as well. And so I feel myself leveling up in this kind of a way as well.
Because you're not just a thought leader, which a thought is just in the etheric realm. You are actually leading now in the 3rd dimension and leading it to the 5th. So thank you for that. And the second question is, what rabbit hole are you currently exploring right now?
Typically, probably 10 rabbit holes at once, something like that, because I'm constantly in love with research. And the way that I do my research process is very intuitive. I often get asked about how do I find the deeper awareness that compels me to connect dots, because that's the way that I really live and expand my consciousness. I'm a super curious soul, and I attribute that to a lot of my awareness, because even through the awareness that I personally receive without reading a book or looking it up, which is typically how I receive my actual awareness that I share, it's driven by a question. So a question comes to me, and I ask deeper questions and receive clues through this inquisitive questioning process. Now, the same thing happens if I'm looking for physical evidence. So if I'm looking to substantiate a deep download, for example, about sound healing or the connection between vibrational phenomena and the physical self, I may ask that question and then receive intuitively a thought leader or a research paper or a publication. I'm constantly looking on academia.edu, and even AI sometimes helping me find the awareness that I need to connect dots and connect with individuals in these fields. So yeah, I'd say my quantum, or not quantum jumps, the rabbit holes that I'm going down involve healing, involve different technologies, involve multidimensional systemic frameworks, which can be attributed to expansion of consciousness, and many other domains which are all interwoven, leading to essentially the journey of expanded consciousness that fits into physical 3D frameworks. That's what I'm most interested in developing at this time, thinking about how can this ethereal information be reduced to such a level that people can actually access it, which involves providing the solutions in a certain way that is catered to both the brain and the logos-centered experience, and at the same time to people that are feelers and intentional states. So that merger is something that I'm curious to investigate and to create new solutions for.
Yeah, because the young people, we can't just stay in the in the mind, intellectually deciphering all these concepts. It's now like, let's put it to work. So
Yeah,
honor you
exactly.
for that.
Thank you.
The last question, we call it the time capsule, and it requires us to look out into the future around 15 to 20 years. I say those timeframes because I see that is when our generation is going to be stepping into more leadership positions around the world, and actually making bigger changes. And you had the opportunity to have a time capsule, and you have imagined this time capsule. These next generation of leaders are going to have the opportunity to open your time capsule when the time is right in 15, 20 years. And these are the leaders that are stepping in and really encompassing all the solutions that we're laying the grounds for the new quantum jump that is happening for humanity. And you can include anything that you want in this time capsule. It's sort of like they're gonna open it, and they're gonna have a download of source resources, information, guidance from you to lead into the new earth. It can be anything it could be physical, it could be non-physical, but what would you include in this time capsule for the next generation of leaders?
What an interesting question. Wow. It's kind of what actually drives my thought process in thinking about what does the world need, because I'm really actively thinking about where we as a society, as a collective consciousness. There are certainly, like I had mentioned, some existential risks that I'm picking up on, and a lot of people are as well. The main one probably being at this time, artificial intelligence and the rise of this new kind of potential to experience the world through a more programmed reality of just predictability, and thinking about what currently exists and spitting out outputs, which can diminish creativity, empathy, love, compassion. I think AI is something that is not necessarily a threat if we choose to integrate it and we choose to use it lovingly to our advantage, to eliminate certain activities and things that people don't really need to be doing more. So we can gear up more creative sense and think about how do we become complex problem solvers and use the human potential to augment solutions to expand consciousness. So that's what needs to be laid the framework for. I think if we were to jump 15, 20 years in the future, like you said, we'd probably be seeing a reality in which AI is driving human creation and human outputs to a large extent. Even right now, we see so many applications for AI, even in art, in terms of producing new works, new creative books, different kinds of technologies, to the point that I think you might not be as motivated to be creative faculties of awareness and to be living in a divinely inspired way. So this is what I feel leaders really need to internalize. There's got to be a bridge laid between the past and almost inspiring a renaissance of new kind of human development, whole human development, where we're guided into our heart space to think about how can we use artificial intelligence and the new technologies and all the new innovations which drive human progress, but in a way that's balanced, that allows to be pioneers of human expansion, that allows us to live more heart-centered lives, some of the monotone, elements of human expression by using AI to help us, but then to reinforce solutions that are also loving in nature. So I would install in that time capsule a message of love and of needing to feel. I think what's getting diminished is really the connection to the soulfulness, to the human spirit. And what people really need is the connection to divine essence. So the book that comes to mind is The Alchemist book so much, by Paulo Coelho. It talks about the journey to oneness essentially, to connecting the self to a dream world, which is the world of love, the world of integration. And there's something so magical about that book because it speaks about a hero's journey that all of us are going on individually, but it's a journey that's connected to love and connection to all things. And I think what some people might be experiencing is the distancing from this reality of oneness and magic and wonder, because we're getting pulled into a reality in which things are automated and AI generated. And it's like we don't need to work as hard or be so in touch with our spirit anymore because things can be easier. And people and leaders to think about not how to make life easier, make it more effective, how to experience ourselves on this landscape of human potentiality and be more artistic, more creative, more loving. So the framework would include qualities about conscious union, Maybe talk about things like Tantra, talk about divine integration, creativity, balance, and how to use AI for our advantage without allowing it to, eliminate human creativity and potentiality in a way that's really integrated in nature. So that's the main message. It's really a theme that balance needs to be preserved. You can either use AI for or better measurement, and that too is purely subjective. Conscious leaders of tomorrow are going to be seeing that we can use the tool to augment our potential, which needs to be done by preserving what was existent before AI was around, which is really the feeling nature of reality and being truly connected and in touch with all things without losing our sense of oneness.
We're going to need a whole nother podcast just to expand on that rich time capsule that you just left behind for these leaders. Gabi, I just wanted to express my deepest gratitude for your brilliant mind and your unconditional heart. So thank you so much for integrating those two worlds and showing us an example of what that world could look like by being the example of it. So I appreciate you so much.
You too. We're in this together. Thank you for sharing this message that all of us so need to hear as well through everyone that you bring on your show.
Yes, we are. Much love.